Welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I am joined by the Christoph guy who is right there.
Hey, everybody. I'm so glad you're here with us today.
All right, so we're going back to WW Uno. Last time we had just finished talking about the coup that happened with Russia. So we're going to be starting with the Russian Revolution this episode.
Ooh.
So, you ready to get underway?
Absolutely.
All right. So by the end of 1916, Russian casualties totaled nearly 5 million. That's a lot of people.
That is a lot of people.
Yeah. The major urban areas were affected by food shortages and high prices. In March of 1917, the Tsar, Nicholas, ordered the military to forcibly suppress a wave of strikes in Petrograd. But the troops actually made an intelligent decision for themselves and refused to fire on the crowds.
Generally a good move.
Yeah. Revolutionaries set up the Petrograd Soviet and feared a left-wing takeover. The state of Duma forced Nicholas to abdicate and establish the Russian Provisional Government, which confirmed Russia's willingness to continue the war.
So the Duma that's like their parliament, right?
The State Duma is the lower house of the Federal Assembly of Russia.
Okay. So a House of Commons or House of Representatives equivalent. I wonder how that worked in the Russian monarchy. I'm not too familiar with that dynamic, but I'm sorry.
Well, the monarchy's gone now.
Well, yeah, but the Duma forced him to step down. So before, like at that time, I think Russia was one of the few absolute monarchies left. And so
up until this time,
until that time. And so I don't know how the Duma had that kind of sway or what it even did. Like, what does a parliament do when in an absolute monarchy? Anyway, we're getting away from it.
Yeah, that's more for the Russian history
podcast. I gotcha.
Now, the Petrograd Soviet refused to disband, creating competing power centers and caused confusion and chaos, which caused the frontline soldiers to be demoralized, and they were not really up for the fight anymore. In the summer of 1917, a Central Powers offensive began in Romania under the command of August von Mackensen. And this was to knock Romania out of the war. This resulted in the battles of Usti, where up to 1 million Central Power troops were present.
Whoa. Those battlefields were enormous.
Yeah.
A staggering number of people.
Yeah. The battles lasted from July 22nd to September 3rd, and eventually the Romanian army came out victorious.
Wow. Way to hold out.
Yeah. Thankfully, August von Mackensen could not plan another offensive because he had to transfer troops to the Italian front.
Okay.
So, following the Tsar's abdication, someone else came to the top. Do you know who this was?
Well, I know there were some competing factions, like initially, but I think the leader of the Bolsheviks, it's not Stalin, Vladimir Lenin, shows up on the scene.
You are correct 100%.
It happens every once in a while.
Yes. So Lenin, with the help of the German government, was ushered by train from Switzerland into Russia on April 16th, 1917.
Thanks, Germany.
Yeah. Discontent and weaknesses of the provisional government led to a rise in the popularity for the party you mentioned before, the Bolshevik Party. And they demanded an immediate end to the war. The Revolution of November was followed in December by an armistice and negotiations with Germany. At first, the Bolsheviks refused the German terms, but when the German troops began marching across Ukraine unopposed, the new government was like, guys, this is not cool. And they acceded to the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk on March 3rd of 1918. This treaty ceded vast territories, including Finland, the Baltic provinces, and part of Poland and Ukraine to the Central Powers.
Wow. I was unaware of Finland's former fealty to Russia. That's interesting. It plays into modern times because you keep hearing about how these countries, specifically that you're talking about now, Russia wants them back,
Yeah,
and so
they do.
this is informative.
So even though German had this huge success in knocking Russia out of the war, the manpower required by the Germans to occupy the captured territory probably contributed to the failure of their spring offensive and secured relatively little food and other materials for the Central Powers war effort. So now that Russia was out of the war, Romania found itself by itself on the Eastern Front. And so they were like, okay, we cannot do this anymore. Hey, let's do a treaty, guys. And they signed the Treaty of Bucharest with the Central Powers in May of 1918. And this knocked Romania out of the war.
Wow.
Under the terms of that treaty, Romania had to give territory to Austria-Hungary and Bulgaria and lease its oil reserves to Germany.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's so okay. This is looking pretty good for the Central Powers. I mean, helping to fuel the Russian Revolution and then the dominoes that are falling as a result, at least initially.
Yeah. Now, one of the terms that the Central Powers did not like was that they had to recognize the union of Bessaraba and Romania.
Then that first name I am not familiar with at all. What does that mean? Is that two countries? I know Romania is, but
It is within Moldavia and Ukraine.
okay.
It's a historical region.
Okay, I gotcha.
So that's going to bring us to when the U.S. takes up the rifle and marches to war.
All right, let's see. Now we're getting closer to our wheelhouse.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you talk about a conflict on a global scale. There's much more than just two belligerents.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of context that needs to be laid out first, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think we've done a pretty good job. Say
Yeah.
we, even though you did most of the talking.
Yeah. And remember, this is just the general overview. Next,
Right.
we're going to dive in deeper.
Which I'm excited about.
The U.S. was a major supplier of war material to the Allies, but remained neutral in 1914. A lot of the American people were opposed to the idea of involvement in quote unquote foreign wars. On May 7th of 1915, the British passenger liner RMS Lusitania was sunk by a German submarine, killing around 1,200 people, which included 128 Americans. The American president, who?
Woodrow Wilson.
Yes. He demanded an apology and warned that the U.S. would not tolerate unrestricted submarine warfare. But again, he was like, we're not going to get into it, though. Not with guns and bullets and weapons of war.
That seems reasoned. This is unacceptable. cut it out. If this continues, there could be consequences, but let's not be hasty.
Right. Let's just not jump in without thinking about it. Now, more Americans died after the sinking of the USS Arabic in August. Betham Hollweg, he ordered an end to such attacks, and that allowed that instance to just blow over. He was a German politician. But it did lead to a wider discussion over the morality of neutrality, a position summarized by the former president, who?
Oh, Herbert Hoover?
No.
Theodore Roosevelt.
Yes. Ding, 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 ding. He denounced the idea of, quote, setting a spiritual example to others by sitting idle, uttering cheap platitudes and picking up their trade.
Yeah, he was,
Oh, he was a warmonger.
yeah, he got us, I think, almost single-handedly involved in the Spanish-American War when he was acting as Secretary of the Navy, if I recall. So this is
He
on brand.
he liked conflict, 100%. Now, his view remained a minority view, and Wilson was narrowly reelected as president in 1916, campaigning on a slogan called, quote, "He kept us out of the war."
That's a good slogan.
That's a great slogan. By the end of 1916, the British naval blockade was causing a very serious shortage in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And so Wilhelm, he was like, we can't keep doing this, guys. Let's get back into unrestricted submarine warfare. And that happened on February 1st, 1917. Now, the German government did realize that this was probably going to bring the U.S. into the war.
Oh, yeah.
But the German Navy was like, it's going to be fine. We can easily starve Britain into submission in less than 6 months. So we can get this done before the Americans get really, really ticked off at us and start shooting.
All right. I mean, that's, the fog of war is so interesting, and you only have so many resources, and you have to make decisions to promote your war effort. They have to do something. Germany's really at a disadvantage relative to a lot of other imperial powers.
So at the same time, the military position appeared to be stable, at least for, the foreseeable future, even though they had gotten heavy losses at Verdun and the Somme during 1916. So a withdrawal to the newly created Hindenburg Line would enable the West here to conserve its troops, because they were looking over at Russia and going, oh, the revolution, helping us, revolution, yay. So the combination meant Germany was willing to gamble that it could force the Allies to peace before the U.S. would start shooting.
Ooh, that's quite the needle to thread, as they say.
Yeah, it's a very, very thin line. So Wilson responded by severing diplomatic relations on February 2nd.
What year was that?
1917. The day after Germany was like, we're going back to unrestricted submarine warfare.
I think that's also, I want to say it was early 1917. I don't know if it was before or after. The Zimmerman note is in there somewhere, right? That's where Germany sends a telegram.
Yeah, we're getting to it here in just a minute.
I'm on the edge of my seat. Continue.
Yeah. So he was very reluctant to start hostilities without overwhelming public support, and this delayed a military response. On February 24th, he was presented with the
Zimmerman note.
Telegram.
Telegram.
But
Sorry.
yes, it was a note. This was drafted in January by the German Foreign Secretary, Arthur Zimmermann. It was intercepted and decoded by British intelligence, who shared it with their American counterparts.
It's really interesting.
Zimmerman,
Oh,
huh?
I was going to say it's really interesting because early on in the war, the Brits cut the German telegram cables. And so they weren't able to communicate freely. But Woodrow Wilson, being neutral, he said, yeah, feel free to use our cables to communicate as long as it's not directly connected with the war effort. And so Germany's using our cables and the Brits are spying on our cables. And so they have to admit to the Americans, how do we tell them we've been listening to all their stuff, but we do want them in the war? And so then this unfolds. I think it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The spy versus spy thing. So the Zimmerman telegram causes some concern because of Mexico. Mexico was financing the Russian Bolsheviks and the anti-British Irish nationalists. And so Zimmerman had hoped to exploit the nationalist feelings in Mexico caused by American incursions during the Pancho Villa expedition. He promised the Mexican president, who?
Ooh. I don't know. It's not Santa Anna.
No, it's not. This is way past his time.
19. I don't know who the president was at that time.
I would be very impressed if you had. Carranza.
Okay.
Zanza promised the Mexican president support for a war against the United States and helping in recovering Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona.
Ooh.
But here's what the Germans did not realize. Mexico is very, very familiar with their own history. They're very, very familiar with what's going on above them. They were like, no way, Jose.
Yeah, we don't want that.
And they're like, no, that is not going to happen. So when the telegram was published on March 1st, it caused an upsurge in support for the war. But it did not eliminate opposition to it. This is when the public started to fiercely talk to each other and debate it and was like, we got to go to war. No, we can't go to war. But look, they're trying to make Mexico attack us, but we still don't want to get involved over there.
Right.
So this is like butting heads. So the most significant factor in creating the overwhelming majority that Wilson needed was a German submarine offensive. It not only cost American lives, but paralyzed trade as ships were reluctant to put out to sea. They're messing with the money. What happens when you mess with U.S. money?
You get the... Oh, I forgot what it is. You
get bullets thrown at you.
Yeah, there's an expression. You get the lead or the something, and they're getting... Yes. Okay. Don't mess with the money. Better saying for next episode.
This also caused food shortages in cities along the East Coast. So on March 22nd, Congress said, all right, we are now arming our merchant ships.
Well, it seems like an appropriate escalation, right? You need food and materials, and ships don't want to go out there. So it's like, all right, well, this is a way to help that happen.
Yeah. So a week or two later, Wilson, he makes a speech to Congress on April 2nd. He presented it as a crusade, quote, against human greed and folly, against Germany, and for justice, peace, and civilization. In other words, let's go to war, gentlemen.
But for the most noble reasons ever.
Yeah. 4 days later, Congress was like, you got it, dude. We declare war on Germany,
Oh,
but we're doing it as an associated power and not a formal ally.
like it's an independent declaration of war that has nothing to do necessarily with the current ongoing declarations with France or England or anybody, right? It's just like this is
Right.
our own thing.
This is US versus Germany only.
Interesting. I bet that really changes how the treaties work out.
Yeah. So that means the US remained outside the Pact of London. And as I just said, Germany only, no other central powers. Which, makes sense because the only ones attacking the US right now are the Germans.
Yeah, that does make sense. The whole reason the central powers are connected is through alliances, right? I'm sure these alliances are intact. So if the US declares war on Germany, Austria Hungary, and the Ottomans will declare war on the US, I assume?
Eventually.
Okay.
Why are you trying to jump ahead?
Man, that's what I do.
Yeah, that's
Sorry,
what you do.
this is the thinking that the listener is like, well, wait a minute. If this happens, and you're like, whoa, slow down, Christoph, representative of the listener. And so you're politely asking the listener to slow down and wait for the story to unfold. I feel like this is what my daughter must be like during movies. She's like, why is that happening? What are they doing? I'm like, just let the story happen and you will be
Just
told.
be quiet and watch.
Right. Not
Right.
quite that. Yeah, it's just like it's on the way. It will be presented. Good questions though, but they will be answered.
Or, when they come in halfway through a season and start asking questions
Yeah.
about why this is happening. It's
Yeah.
like,
Why is he so
you-
mean to that person?
you gotta go
Episode
back.
3 explains the whole thing. Right.
Just don't ask me the questions. Go back and watch it and catch up.
Yeah. Or just like watch enough to go, okay, I get this dynamic. I don't know why, but it's happening. And then they bring it up. It's like, you have to forgive him for betraying you. Yeah, okay. You got it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the U.S. Navy sends a battleship group to Scapa Flow to join the Grand Fleet, as well as providing convoy escorts. In April of 1917, the U.S. Army had fewer than 300,000, which included National Guard units.
Whoa.
Right. So compared to the British and French armies of 4.1 and 8.3 million,
Golly.
so the Selective Service Act of 1917 was enacted, drafting 2.8 million men.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm. So as you can imagine, the training and equipping 2.8 million men was a huge logistical challenge.
Yes.
So by June of 1918, over 667,000 members of the American Expeditionary Forces had been transported to France. This was increased to 2 million by the end of November.
Wow. They ramped up pretty quickly.
Yeah. Now, their arrival did expose weaknesses in American tactical doctrine, which the U.S. is now having to learn the lessons that everybody else had already been learning
Right.
and learned. Because, the U.S. doctrine was based on pre-1914 principles, just like everybody else was at the beginning. So U.S. commanders were initially slow to accept such ideas, limiting their effectiveness and leading to heavy casualties. It was pretty much not until the last month of the war that the failings were rectified.
Really?
Yeah, the U.S. military never let that happen again, though.
Yeah. It's good. If there's ever a conflict in the world, it is helpful to observe to see, hey, how is this going? Oh, we should keep that in mind if we have to get in a fight, and so on.
Just like what's going on in Ukraine today.
I know they have weaponized drones in a way that was not done previously, and that's really
Mhm.
changing the battlefield. And so I
Oh,
am certain,
immensely changed it.
yeah. So that's going to change how we fight in the future.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, the world's militaries are taking note. So, despite Wilson's conviction that Germany must be defeated, he went to war primarily to ensure the US would play a leading role in shaping the peace.
Ah, right.
This meant preserving independence of action and required the AEF to operate as a separate military force rather than being absorbed into British or French units, as his allies wanted. He was strongly supported in this by the AEF commander, General John J. Pershing.
Ooh, blackjack.
Hmm. He was a proponent of pre 1914 open warfare, who considered the French and British emphasis on artillery as misguided and incompatible with American offensive spirit. Much to the frustration of our allies, who had suffered heavy losses in 1917, he insisted on retaining control of American troops and refused to commit them to the front line until he was able to operate as independent units.
That's good.
As a
Huh.
yeah. So as a result of this, the first significant U.S. involvement was the Massus Argonne offensive in late September of 1918. Right. So that's going to take us from April and into June. So Verdun cost the French nearly 400,000 casualties.
Golly.
The horrific conditions severely impacted their morale, leading to a number of incidents of indiscipline or, rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they were relatively minor, they reflected a belief among the rank and file that their sacrifices were not appreciated by their government or their leadership. Combatants on both sides claimed that the battle was the most psychologically exhausting of the entire war. Now, the French did recognize this. Matter of fact, Philippe Pétain is the one that recognized it.
Hmm.
Uh, he was a French general. So he frequently rotated divisions. This was a process known as the Noria system. This ensured units were withdrawn before their ability to fight was significantly eroded.
That's really, I mean, the fact that that hadn't been thought about before is interesting. Just kind of how modern warfare has unfolded because battles, even Napoleonic time frame, they weren't these really drawn out, bloody. It's over in a day. It's like the battle's over in a day. Months and months of trench warfare and just really draining psychologically. So,
Now, this also did mean that a higher proportion of the French army was affected by Verdun.
oh yeah,
So by the beginning of 1917, morale was pretty brittle, even in the divisions with good combat records.
right.
In December of 1916, Robert Nivelle replaced Pétain as commander of the French armies on the Western Front and began planning a spring attack in Champagne. This was going to be part of a joint Franco-British operation. Nivelle claimed the capture of his main objective, the Chemin des Dames, would achieve a massive breakthrough, the cost of no more than 15,000.
Yeah.
However, poor security means that German intelligence was well informed on the tactics and timetables.
Oh, oh,
Yeah. Now, even though the Germans knew that they were coming, when they were coming, and how they were coming, when the attack began on April 16th, the French did make substantial gains before being brought to a halt. The halt was because of a newly built and extremely strong defense called the Hindenburg Line. Nivelle persisted with frontal assaults, And by April 25th, the French had suffered nearly 135,000 casualties.
Oh, that is that's so many people. I mean, I always think of this in whenever you list numbers in terms of NFL stadium capacity or college football stadium capacity, and it's like the biggest ones hold like close to 110,000, and that's more than a full stadium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So concurrent British attacks at Arras was more successful, although ultimately did not really have any strategic value at all. Operating as a separate unit for the first time, the Canadian Corps recaptured the Vimy Ridge during the battle and is viewed by many Canadians as a defining moment in creating a sense of national identity. Now, Neville continued the offensive, and on May 3rd, the 21st Division, which had been involved in some of the heaviest fighting at Verdun, told him, no, we're not going into battle. This initiated French army mutinies.
Oh,
Within days, act of collective indiscipline had spread to 54 divisions and 200,000 desertions.
wow.
I'm sorry, 20,000 desertions.
Okay, significant.
Yeah. Unrest was almost entirely confined to the infantry, whose demands were largely non-political, including better economic support for families at home and regular periods of leave, which Neville had ended after General Philippe was taken out. Now, the vast majority of those that remained were willing to defend their own lines, but refused to participate in offensive action, which resulted in a complete breakdown of trust in leadership. So Neville was fired on May 15th and was replaced by Pétain, who resisted demands for drastic punishment and about restoring morale by improving conditions. While we don't have exact figures, only about 27 men were executed,
That's
which is amazing.
yeah. Given how many mutinies there were, that could have really just destroyed France's effort completely.
Mhm. Yeah. Another 3,000 were sentenced to prison, but the psychological effects, of course, were very long lasting. A veteran commented, quote, Pétain has purified the unhealthy atmosphere, but they have ruined the heart of the French soldier.
Absolutely.
The last large-scale offensive of this period was a British attack with French help at Passchendaele between July and November of 1917. This offensive opened with great promise for the Allies before being bogged down in the October mud. Casualties are disputed, of course. They will always be.
Mhm.
But they think they were pretty much equal on both sides, between 200 and 400,000
Yeah.
per side.
Wow.
Yeah, so between 400 and 800,000 total.
That's crazy.
So the Central Powers win at the Battle of Caporetto. This led the Allies to convene the Rapallo Conference, at which they formed the Supreme War Council to coordinate planning.
That's a good idea, generally.
Yeah. Before this, the British and French armies had operated under separate commands.
Okay, that seems like a bad idea, but I'm sure they had their reasons. Similar
Yeah.
to how Blackjack Pershing was unwilling to allow his troops to be commanded by the French or the British, I'm sure they felt the same way about their own troops. It's like, no, we're going to do our own thing. But it would be great to have some coordination. And I'm sure there was
Mhm.
some minor coordination, but probably no great strategy.
No, not in the way that it should have been done on the
Right.
entire front instead of just a couple of generals here and a couple of generals there.
Mm-hmm.
So in December, that's when Russia steps out of the war. This allowed a large number of German troops to migrate to the west. Uh, so at that same time, American troops start pouring in,
Oh boy.
which means instead of the Eastern Front being massive, it's now the Western Front.
Right.
Uh, Now, the Central Powers knew that with the influx of the Americans, that they were not going to be able to win a protracted war. But they did have high hopes for success based on a final quick offensive. Also, everybody was becoming increasingly fearful of social unrest and revolution in Europe.
Oh yes. It just took out a huge country over there.
Yeah. So that means everybody was looking very hard for a decisive victory. In 1917, Emperor Charles I of Austria attempted a separate peace negotiation with Clemenceau secretly through his wife's brother Sixtus in Belgium as a go-between. Without Germany's knowledge, Italy was opposed to it. His attempt was revealed to Germany, and this resulted in a huge diplomatic catastrophe.
Uh.
All right, let's jump over to the Ottomans, shall we?
Sure. I just wanted to say that's interesting that they were trying to make that separate piece. And you reminded me that at this time there was a lot of heads of state, monarchs that were all related. And so, like, the Tsar in Russia had a connection to, I think, the German imperial leadership as well as the English. Like, they all had relationship and they would write letters to each other even before this. And so that wasn't necessarily out of step of how you would do something like that, especially if you're fighting family. And imagine your family fights at Thanksgiving and now put it on the world stage and call it World War One. That's pretty crazy. You'd want to, hey, let's resolve this. How about that?
Yeah. Let's just cancel Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you're
And
not
there'll be
invited.
no world wars.
It's- yeah, you may be onto something, Dale.
All right, so that brings us back to March and April 1917 at the First and Second Battles of Gaza. The German and Ottoman forces stopped the advance of the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, which had begun in August of 1916 at the Battle of Ramnai. At the end of October, the Sinai and Palestine campaign resumed when General Edmund Albanese 20th Corps, 21st Corps, and Desert Mounted Corps won the Battle of Beersheba. A couple of Ottoman armies were defeated a couple of weeks later at the Battle of Mughar Ridge. And then in early December, Jerusalem was captured after another Ottoman defeat at the Battle of Jerusalem. Around the same time, Frederick Freer Kress von Kressenstein was relieved of his duties as the 8th Army's commander, which means I never have to say that name again.
That was a name.
And he was replaced by David Pasha. A few months later, the commander of the Ottoman army in Palestine, Erich von Frankenhayn, was replaced by Otto Lehmann von Sanders. In early 1918, the front line was extended all the way to the Jordan Valley.
Yikes.
Mm-hmm. This followed the first Transjordan and the second Transjordan attacks by the British Empire in March and April of 1918. In March, most of the Egyptian expeditionary forces, the British infantry, and the yeomanry cavalry were sent to the Western Front, thanks to the spring offensive.
I see. Right.
And they were replaced by Indian Army units. During several months of reorganization and training during the summer, a number of attacks were carried out in sections of the Ottoman front line. These pushed the front line north to more advantageous positions for the Entente in preparation for an attack and to acclimatize the newly arrived Indian Army infantry. It really wasn't until the middle of September that the integrated force was ready for a large scale operation. So, this reorganized Egyptian expeditionary force with an additional mounted division broke Ottoman forces at the Battle of Megiddo in
Mm.
September of 1918. In 2 days, the British and Indian infantry, supported by a creeping barrage, broke the Ottoman front line and captured the headquarters of the Eighth Army. They also captured the continuous trench lines at Tabsor, Aurora, and the Seventh Army headquarters at Nablus. The Desert Mounted Corps rode through the break in the front line created by the infantry, and during virtually continuous operations by the Australian Light Horse, the British Mounted Yeomanry, the Indian Lancers, and New Zealand Mounted Rifle Brigades in the Jezero Valley, they captured Nazareth, Afula, and Bizan, Jenin, along with Haifa on the Mediterranean coast, and the Dara east of the Jordan River on the Hejaz Railway. The Samak and Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee were captured on the way north to Damascus. While this was all happening, Chaytor's force of Australian Light Horse and the New Zealand Mounted Rifles, the Indian and the British West Indies and Jewish infantry captured the crossings of the Jordan River, Salt, Amman, and at Aziz. Most of the Fourth Army of the Ottomans, after that huge, overwhelming push, the Armistice of Mudros was signed at the end of October, which ended hostilities with the Ottoman Empire.
Oh,
Once they reached Aleppo, they were like, we are done.
I remember a quote that I had read. I think it was from somebody high up in the German, either military command or the leadership, but they described the Ottoman Empire as being fettered to a corpse. Like, they kept getting themselves into trouble and then asking for help to get out of trouble. And so, yeah, the Ottomans were very powerful for a very long time, but at this time they were not, very disorganized and somewhat ineffective as a military relative to their counterparts. And so I know that the Ottomans pretty much, they dominated the Middle East, and it's after this that all that gets carved up, I think by the British.
All right. So we're going to actually end it here
Oh.
today.
All right.
When we come back next time, we're going to be talking about the Pope.
Oh,
Yep, the Pope even gets involved.
well, it is a world war.
Yep. All right. So we like to end our episodes with honoring one of our fallen angels with the help of HeroCards.us. And today we are going to honor Donald Robert Abraham, Private First Class Donald Robert Abraham. His hometown was New London, Wisconsin, served with the U.S. Marine Corps, 3rd Battalion, 28th Marine Regiment, 5th Marine Division. He received a Silver Star and Purple Heart. His date of sacrifice was March 5th, 1945, killed in action in Iwo Jima, Japan. He was 20 years old. PFC Donald Abraham took part in one of the most strategically important and hellish battles of the Pacific Theater in World War II, known as the Pork Chop because of its shape. Iwo Jima is a mostly flat island covered in thick black volcanic ash. The Battle of Iwo Jima is remembered for the flag raising on Mount Shirabachi, captured in Joe Rosenthal's Pulitzer Prize-winning photo. The battle lasted from February 16th to March 26th, 1945. For his bravery under fire while attacking an entrenched enemy position, PFC Abraham was awarded the Silver Star. The citation reads, "The President of the United States of America takes pride in presenting the Silver Star posthumously to Private First Class Donald R. Abraham, Marine Corps serial number 474542, United States Marine Corps Reserve, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against the enemy while serving with Company G, 3rd Battalion, 28th Marines, 5th Marine Division at Iwo Jima, Volcano Islands on March 5th, 1945. Participating in an attack on a strongly entrenched enemy force and overrunning its position, Private First Class Abraham, with his squad, was subjected to heavy mortar and intense sniper fire. Making his way to a nearby friendly tank, Private First Class Abraham directed it through his squad's area to a good firing position, retained his hazardous position, and successfully directed its fire to destroy a heavy enemy mortar emplacement. His sound judgment and outstanding devotion to duty, in the face of grave peril, contributed to the success of that operation and reflect the highest credit upon Private First Class Abraham and the United States Naval Service." So, Private First Class Donald Robert Abraham, we thank you.
Thank you.
All right, dude, get us the heck out of here.
Okay, well, say no more. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to us and going on this journey to understand a little bit more about why the world is the way it is and how people have been fighting forever and how things have changed over time. And I just find it really fascinating to find out more about ourselves as we kind of discover where we've been. Um, if you'd like to get in touch with us, maybe you had a family member that served in World War I and they had a specific story that's like, oh, we should talk about Gallipoli or what have you. There's a couple of ways to get in touch with us, and we'd love to hear from you. So, number one, email us. Email address is usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also catch us on X, formerly Twitter, X-Twitter. The handle is at USNHistoryPod. And we also have a Discord server. So if you'd like to jump in and chat about whatever you want to chat about, and other people there can chat with you, and we can chat with you, and it'd be great. It's a party. Come on down. You can find a link to that in the show notes. Let's see what else. Oh, yes. Rate and review. We have some ratings, and they make us feel good when they're up there, 5 stars, etc. There are lower ratings. We don't like to talk about them, but give us specific feedback. If there's something that is happening that you don't like, maybe that's something we can change. No promises, but we do want to be receptive to the people that we're talking to. So drop us a line. Let us know. I think that is everything. Back to you, Dale.
Well, as always, we're going to wish y'all fair winds and following seas. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.